In this edition of Global Print, I'm going to take a look at the positions some key countries around the world, not just in the Islamic world, but elsewhere as well. In the West, for example, France, positions that these countries have taken on the question of the hijab. Now, naturally, my interest has been spurred by the fact that the Karnataka High Court is these days hearing arguments in favor and against the wearing of the hijab. We have seen how in these last several days, several pre-university schools and colleges in Karnataka have prohibited girls from wearing this traditional sort of headscarf that Islam dictates, or traditional Islam dictates that women should wear. So some have been forced to remove the hijab when they enter the classroom, and some other colleges who don't have uniforms have said yes, until the Karnataka High Court takes a call, we will allow them to wear the hijab. But before I go into what some nations around the world, including France in the West, a permanent 5 Security Council power, as well as some nations in the Islamic world, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, etc., have taken, dear viewer, I'd like to make an appeal to you. Please do subscribe, pay just a little bit for ThePrint's free, fair, objective and unhyphenated journalism. It's rupees 159 only, so do click on the join button and you will become a subscriber. You will get various benefits and privileges that non-subscribers don't have. So now back to my column, Global Print, in ThePrint's website this week, in which I try and look at how various countries around the world and the positions that they have taken on wearing the hijab. And the most interesting example of this is France. Now, France, as you know, over the last several years, actually over the last 15 or 20 years, has taken a very, very strong position on not wearing the hijab. So in 2004 came this first sort of edict of the first law, which said that Muslim women cannot wear the veil. In fact, they called it the law of the veil. But what is the veil? Is the veil a hijab, which is basically a headscarf around your head? Is it the niqab, which is a face veil that basically sort of covers your entire face and just leaves your eyes? Is it a burqa, which is the full black dress from top to toe that women in large parts of the Islamic world wear? In Afghanistan, they don't wear a black burqa, they wear a blue burqa. So around the Islamic world as well, the first point to note is that there is no uniform covering of the female form. But in France, for example, what has been really interesting is that in 2004, this law of the veil that came into being was predicated on a 1905 separation of the church from the state. So at the time when the Catholic Church was very, very strong and powerful, the government of the Republic of France decided that because of the ideals of equality and fraternity, that all citizens must be equal, and that religion cannot play any role or any demonstrable role in the lives of citizens, at least in public life. So this 2004 law actually is quite interesting. So it bans all the display of all religious motives or covering. So you cannot not only wear the hijab, but you cannot wear the Jewish kippah, which is the prayer cap that is traditionally worn by practicing Jews. Nor can you wear big prominent crosses. So all religious symbols on your person are disallowed by this 2004 law in France. In fact, over the last 15 or 20 years, in 2011, again, there was a law that was passed against the niqab, which, like I just told you, is a face veil. So it basically covers your entire face and it just leaves a little bit of space for your eyes. So that was banned. But France, of course, has had a lot of very public contestation between the proponents of a very aggressive Islam as well as the secular state, for example. And the well-known example of that has been the attack against the Charlie Hebdo satirical magazine in Paris in 2015, in which 12 people were killed. And that happened because the Charlie Hebdo magazine decided to caricature the Prophet. Now, a lot of very sort of staunch and tradition-minded Muslims believe that the Prophet doesn't have a form, and that, in fact, if you see anywhere in the Islamic arts, Islamist arts, you do not, the Prophet doesn't take a form. So first of all, to give him a form, a shape in the form of a man, and then to demonize him or to caricature him is considered anathema. And there was a lot of anger across the Muslim world when the Charlie Hebdo magazine did that. And this was, and so a very terrorist fundamentalist group that attacked this Charlie Hebdo magazine's offices in Paris, in which 12 people were killed. Now, there's absolutely no justification at all for any violence. We all know that, whether or not you disagree or agree that the Prophet can be given a form by somebody else. The fact that violence was introduced, I think the Islamists or whoever did it completely lost the plot. Again, in October 2020, when a teacher called Samuel Paty was beheaded, he was teaching in a school on the outskirts of Paris, and he was beheaded by a Chechen immigrant, ostensibly because he was sort of showing again the cartoons on the Prophet, and this young 18-year-old Chechen immigrant was so angry about that he took a knife and beheaded Samuel Paty. And Emmanuel Macron, who was president at the time and is president today, of course, said at the time that Samuel Paty was killed, and I'm quoting him, Samuel Paty was killed because Islamists want our future and because they know that with quiet heroes like him, they will never have it. Now, this, of course, is about France, and France uses a word, it's called laicité. The French word is laicité, which translates as hard secularism. And this goes back to this 1905 separation between the church and the state, and the French government has since very, very clearly, very harshly sometimes, invoked this separation between church and state, and has insisted that there be no sort of clashes between the two. But that's, on the one hand, that's the expression of laicité, or this harsh brand of secularism in France. In the Islamic world, we have other examples. Of course, the most sort of obvious example is that of Saudi Arabia. Now, we know that Mohammed bin Salman, in these last several years, has become, he's the crown prince, and he has ensured that the kingdom become a much more open place, that women are allowed to do many more things than they were earlier by law. For example, simple things like driving or going to the movies or traveling abroad or living alone independently. Earlier, you needed a male guardian to sign off, or you needed somebody, a male person to accompany you to do several of these things. But Mohammed bin Salman's reforms on equality between men and women has ensured that at least some of these things that we take for granted elsewhere in the world are also valid for women in Saudi Arabia. Having said that, it's not as if Saudi Arabia has just sort of become this very egalitarian place. In fact, there are still a lot of laws which insist that women basically they must know their place in life in Saudi Arabia. Now, in cities like Jeddah, a lot of women do not wear the abaya or the full black covering, which is sort of, you cover yourself from head to toe. So these reforms have enabled them to come out and wear the clothes that they want to. But in more traditional parts of that country, like in Riyadh and elsewhere, women still publicly at least wear the abaya. In another Muslim country in the Gulf, for example, in the UAE, the United Arab Emirates. Now, Dubai, we know, is a very interesting example. Dubai has opened its doors to people from all over the world. It aims to be the Manhattan of the East. It's this sort of very glittering city built on the backs, mind you, of immigrants and labor from India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Nepal, at least, Bangladesh, South Asian countries. But the sheikhs of the UAE, the fatwas that they issue, the primary fatwa is that you cannot criticize the Gulf royalty or the Dubai royalty or the UAE royalty. However, the sheikhs have also said, and they have been much more open about social life in Dubai, in the UAE, and because they understand that if Dubai has to become an international financial city, then they have to be much more open in their social mores. So women from all over the world are allowed to wear what they want, and they in the restaurants and even in the beach in Dubai, for example, you can be very open. And after the Abraham Accords were signed less than a couple of years ago, Israelis are flocking to Dubai as if it's their favorite destination. So that's another example of an Islamic state and how it treats its women. Afghanistan, again, very well known. Women have, after the Taliban took power on the 15th of August last year, the status of women has again been demoted. Women are now no longer seen publicly, not just without the headscarf, but without the traditional blue burqa that you wear from head to toe. We call it a shuttlecock burqa sometimes, because you can just see the eyes, and there's a netting for the eyes, and it looks like the netting of a shuttlecock net, of a badminton net. So that's Afghanistan. Actually, Pakistan. Now, Pakistan also is an Islamic republic, but Pakistan is very interesting. When you go to the big cities, Karachi, Lahore, you see a lot of women who do not wear any kind of so-called Islamic dress. And, that's because Pakistani women are very, very feisty. But if you just sort of go into the suburbs, then increasingly there is a lot of women also wearing the burqa. And what is interesting is that in this Valentine's Day that just went, the government in Punjab, which is in Pakistan, Punjab, issued a diktat which said that students of Punjab University during Valentine's Day, mind you, can only come out wearing the black abaya, and not just the black abaya, but also black gloves, and that men must wear the prayer cap. So there you have it in Pakistan, with so many influences colliding. You have the government, which insists that women have to wear certain kinds of clothes on certain times of the year. For example, Valentine's Day, which is quite odd because Valentine's Day is not even an Islamic festival. But I think the most interesting country in the Islamic world, at least on the question of the hijab, is Turkey. And the reason I say that is because Turkey in the last 100 years has overturned its own diktat on wearing traditional clothing. So let me take you back to the 1920s when Kemal Ataturk, or Kemal Pasha as he was called, with the fall of the Ottoman Empire, decided that Turkey has to be a modern country. So he sort of wanted to pull it out of the Dark Ages, out of the Middle Ages, and make it this very modern country. And therefore he banned in 1925 a certain kinds of clothing were banned to be worn in public. So the hijab was also banned. But fast forward to 2013, when Recep Erdogan, then Prime Minister, today the President of Turkey, he overturned that 1925 regulation and said that women have to wear the hijab. So interesting examples from countries all over the world about the wearing of the hijab and what women should dress like and how they should dress in the public sphere. In India, of course, the incidents in the last few weeks, and the Karnataka High Court, which is now hearing the argument over whether or not the hijab must be compulsorily worn, is embedded in a very different tradition. In 1947, or say after 1950, when India becomes independent and the constitution demands that all citizens must be treated equally, the question is that how do you meld that in a deeply religious society? So India has not taken the very harsh secular route of laissez-faire like France, because the Indian constitutional sort of those who framed the constitution decided that tradition has to be slowly shown the way, and that's the way of the constitution. So while the knife's edge of secularism insists that, or say laissez-faire must be separated from church and state. In India, that very harsh form of division has not been done so far. But going forward, of course, we will now wait to hear and see what the Karnataka High Court says about the wearing of the hijab. And I'm sure that the Constitution and what that says will be the underpinning of any judgment that is delivered. So do read my column Global Print on the Print's website, and I look forward to hearing your comments on this video. Thank you so much for watching.